Hold up. If you are mindlessly swiping through your feed, kill it. Close out your other browser windows. We're not talking about some hypothetical black swan event that might hit in a decade. I'm breaking down a liquidity event that actually triggered while the Western Hemisphere was unconscious. By the time the mainstream financial press prints this, the fallout will be irreversible. In the dead of night, Bern did not signal a pivot or float a trial balloon. They yanked the emergency cord. At 2 a.m. local time, outbound silver flows were not taxed or throttled. They were completely embargoed. Period. The epicenter involves three giants, PAMP, Valcambi, and Argor-Heraeus. If you hold physical bullion, you know these hallmarks. These heavyweights refine 70% of the planet's silver supply. That is not just market share, that is a choke point. And at 200 hours, the Swiss Federal Customs Administration served all three with identical cease and desist orders. Any cargo exceeding 1,000 kilograms faces immediate license suspension and a mandatory review period lasting 14 to 21 business days. Nothing crosses the border until the paperwork clears. Let me strip away the bureaucratic jargon. The wholesale silver pipeline is effectively clogged. Existing customs inventory is locked down and future bookings are pushed out by a month. Bullion dealers do not buy spot metal like you buy a latte. They move 10,000 or 100,000 ounces in a single tranche. That entire logistical chain just smashed into a concrete wall. Forget the spot price charts or paper derivatives. We are discussing the physical atom, the raw material essential for photovoltaics, medtech circuitry, and the sovereign coins in your safe. The primary spigot has been turned off. Switzerland is not just a participant in the precious metals trade, it is the central nervous system. For 100 years, it has been the global clearinghouse. Miners dig the ore elsewhere, but the refining monopoly lives in the Alps. Door bars from the mine are dirty and alloyed. You cannot use them. The industry requires 4 nines purity. That is the good delivery standard. The Swiss perfected the chemistry and the robotics to do it at volume. Here is the mechanic. Feedstock arrives from Peru, Mexico, the PRC, and Australia. It all funnels into the Swiss cantons. They purify the slag poor investment grade bars, stamp the assay, and distribute it to mints and industrial end users worldwide. The US mint, European fabrication, Asian technology, they all drink from this well. Cap the well and the global engine seizes. That seizure is now active. I have reviewed the customs bulletin. There is no ambiguity here. It invokes national economic security protocols and overrides all standing export permits. That signals absolute panic in Bern. Technocrats do not draft emergency orders at 2 in the morning unless the house is burning down. Why the sudden embargo? Why nuke the supply chain overnight and risk a global margin call? Because 3 black swans landed simultaneously and the Swiss decided to hoard rather than bleed metal to the world. Crisis number 1 began January 1st when Beijing banned refined silver exports. China refines 400 million ounces annually and until recently exported about 120 million. A massive slice of that flow was not going to factories. It was routed to Switzerland. Why re-refine the metal arbitrage and certification? Chinese bars are pure, but they often lack the Western accreditation and form factors needed for the LBMA or COMEX. Swiss firms would melt the Chinese stock, recast it with a PAMP logo, and flip it for a premium. It was a risk-free money printer. When Beijing locked the gates, the Swiss refineries lost a massive feedstock input overnight. This supply shock hit a market running on fumes. For the last 6 months, physical offtake has been voracious. Retail stackers, green energy manufacturers, and ETFs were draining the vaults faster than bars could be poured. The strategic stockpile was already critical. Cut the Chinese supply line and the safety buffer hit 0. By the second week of January, aggregate vault holdings across the big 3 dipped to 8 million ounces. That sounds like a lot. But the global market devours that tonnage in days. At current burn rates, they were staring at a complete inventory stockout. Step into the shoes of a Swiss regulator. You control the world's vault, but your own domestic tech sector needs silver to survive. You see the reserves draining while demand spikes. You stop being a friendly merchant and start securing your own life raft before the music dies. That brings us to crisis number 2 industry. Silver is no longer just a monetary metal. It is strategic material, solar arrays, electric vehicles, medical imaging. Swiss manufacturing cannot function without it. The directive specifically cites preservation of domestic industrial capacity. That is bureaucrat speak for we are keeping everything until we feel safe. Crisis number 3 is credibility. The Swiss brand is reliability. If they default on contracts because the vaults are empty, that trust evaporates. Freezing exports is a PR disaster, but a physical default is a death sentence for the industry. So they shut the valve. Here is the ugly reality. The physical market runs on a just-in-time basis. There are no secret stockpiles. When the Swiss hub goes offline, the shockwave hits the entire chain instantly. Bullion banks and fabricators hold weeks of cover, not years. With a 3 to 4 week logistical void now guaranteed, the system is broken. The squeeze is not coming. It is here. The broader market is still asleep at the wheel because the herd doesn't grasp how the entire financial plumbing hinges on the Swiss. When the narrative finally shifts, the vaults will already be empty. This isn't a noisy crash. It is a mechanical failure. Supply lines don't die with a bang, but with a signature on a manifest. A stamped form, a bureaucratic delay, a quiet seizure. Suddenly, the metal everyone took for granted just vanishes. Why should you care? It comes down to cold, hard logistics. Real-world movement beats paper theory every time. Here's the nightmare scenario that made the bureaucrats in Bern sweat. What happens if the silver bins are empty when local factories need to run? We aren't talking about a forecast for next year. We are talking about right now. What if the makers of pacemakers, microchips, and photovoltaic cells hit a wall because every available ounce was shipped offshore? When they ran the simulations internally, the results were terrifying. Government officials hate terrifying outcomes, so they pulled the emergency brake. This lockdown wasn't about punishing global speculators or stopping investors from stacking bars. It was a desperate move to secure inventory before the shelves went completely bare. The Swiss decided they would rather alienate the entire globe than explain to their own CEOs why the assembly lines had stopped moving. This brings us to the second disaster, the one the media ignores, but the insiders are screaming about behind closed doors. Industrial Europe is in a full-blown panic, and rightfully so. Once Beijing slammed the door on exports and Asian premiums went vertical, European factories started scrambling for metal. The phone lines at Swiss smelting houses began melting down. Requests escalated to demands, and demands escalated to diplomatic arm twisting. Let's look at a concrete case. A massive German solar manufacturer holds a long-standing agreement with a major Swiss refiner. This is the lifeblood of their operation. 10,000 ounces of silver grain every month locked in for 3 years at a flat rate of $82 per ounce. The ink dried in 2023 when spot prices were drifting around $23. Back then, $82 seemed expensive, generous even. Look at the board today. Physical metals pushing $150. That 10,000 ounce shipment the refiner must deliver for $82 could be sold on the open market for nearly double. That is a $68 loss on every single ounce. Do the arithmetic, and you are looking at $680,000 of lost revenue every month. That is over $8 million a year vaporized on a single deal. Scale that up across dozens of similar contracts with European industry, and the financial bleeding is catastrophic. The refiners are stuck holding toxic contracts that are hemorrhaging money compared to the cash market. Meanwhile, the industrial buyers are terrified these deals will be broken. When billion-dollar companies get scared, they don't just whine, they call the capital. Berlin got on the hotline to Bern. Other capitals followed suit. The ultimatum was crystal clear. Swiss refiners must deliver the metal. Europe cannot afford to let its critical supply chain snap. So the refiners want to chase the high bids from investors, but the state is stuck in the middle. On one hand, you have companies desperate to sell at market rates to survive. On the other, you have foreign governments demanding the metal flows to their factories. There is no clean way to untie that knot. So the Swiss took a sledgehammer to it, a total export freeze. Halt everything. Audit every crate. Ensure the domestic industrial machine is fed before a single discretionary ounce crosses the border. That was the second crisis, and it was bad enough. But the third factor is the real reason Switzerland panicked. It is the linchpin of this entire situation. The Swiss do not mine silver. Zero domestic output. Every gram that flows through the Alps comes from somewhere else. Whether it is from the Andes, Mexico, or the outback Switzerland is just a processing hub. It works great when the world is calm. In chaos, however, it is a fatal weakness. Like any serious nation, they stack strategic assets, oil, wheat medicine, and quietly for the last 18 months silver. Because silver isn't just a monetary asset, it is an industrial necessity. Defense systems, green energy grids, medical tech without silver modern industry doesn't just slow down. It bricks. Insiders confirmed the Swiss National Bank and government began aggressively building a stockpile roughly 18 months ago. They read the writing on the wall: protectionism from the East, draining exchange vaults and rising premiums. The strategy was basic. Buy the metal while it is cheap. The goal was 25 million ounces, enough to keep the lights on for 6 months during a total collapse. By December 2025, they had secured about 12 million ounces. Then China pulled the plug. Prices didn't just climb, they went nuclear. Metal budgeted at $80 was suddenly costing $150. The cost to fill the reserve tripled overnight. Simultaneously, the commercial refiners reported their vaults were running on fumes, down to roughly 8 million ounces. The math turned ugly fast. 12 million in the state stash plus 8 million in private hands. That totals 20 million ounces, still 5 million short of the safety target. If exports continued, the private 8 million would fly out the door to the highest international bidder immediately. That would leave the nation stranded with just the initial 12 million ounces. In a world where 400 million ounces of Chinese supply just evaporated and paper markets are fracturing that level of exposure was a national security threat. So they didn't make a market call. They made a survival call. Close the gates, trap the metal inside, commandeer refinery output to finish filling the strategic vaults. Save the domestic economy first, the rest of the world can wait. That order at 2 a.m. wasn't red tape, it was triage. Let's translate this theory into hard reality on the ground. This is where the rubber meets the road. Consider the bullion dealers first. Whether they are based in the States, the Eurozone, or out east, the vast majority source their heavy inventory from Swiss refining hubs. If you hold a silver bar from a major retailer, there is a very strong chance it was cast in Switzerland. These businesses do not sit on mountains of metal. They run lean, just-in-time logistics. They likely have 2, maybe 3 weeks of product on the shelves with restocking shipments in the pipeline. That pipeline is now frozen. Metal sitting in Swiss customs is going nowhere. Fresh orders are dead in the water. Pending export license reviews. A bureaucratic hurdle taking 3 to 4 weeks minimum. The clock is already ticking. In a fortnight or so, dealers will run dry. Out-of-stock banners will plague the websites. At that stage, your capital is irrelevant. Physical unavailability is the only metric that counts. Next up are the mints. Both sovereign and private facilities depend heavily on Swiss purity. The planchers, those blank discs stamped into eagles and maples traced back to Swiss supply chains. If the refiners are blocked, the plancher makers are paralyzed. If the blanks don't show up, the presses stop. No more eagles, no maples, no pandas. The retail investment supply evaporates instantly. Then you have the industrial whales, photovoltaics, tech giants, medical suppliers, and the electric vehicle sector. These firms are not hoarding raw materials. They operate on thin margins. When the supply chain snaps, they face 2 toxic options: shut down production and bleed cash, or hit the spot market and destroy their profitability. Either path triggers a scramble, and we know exactly how market panic functions. It creates aggressive bidding on whatever stock remains, sending premiums skyward, exacerbating the scarcity and fueling the fire. A classic liquidity death spiral. This entire cascade begins with a single bureaucratic order, likely signed while the West slept. We are currently in the eye of the storm, the quiet phase before the news breaks widely. The refiners know, the logistics brokers with stranded cargo know, industrial procurement officers know, governments certainly know, but the public is in the dark. Mainstream financial news is behind the curve. This creates a fleeting arbitrage window of days, not weeks. Once that window shuts, the narrative is irrelevant. Access becomes the only currency. The players who grasp the gravity of this situation aren't debating it on Twitter. They are executing. They are securing alternative flows, locking in forward contracts, quietly hiking rates, and bracing for a supply shock the herd hasn't priced in yet. Meanwhile, the average retail stacker assumes this is just standard market volatility. That information lag is your edge. This is the precise moment where acting early pays off. If you grasp the implications of a Swiss freeze, right now you have first mover advantage. It is not about being smarter. It is about being first. Markets reward timing far more than they reward intellect. In this initial stage right now, the crisis is effectively invisible. The dealers with stranded inventory, the shorted industrial buyers, the refiners, and the state actors, they have the intel. But the wider market is asleep. You can still buy metal. Premiums are stiff, sure, but physical product is obtainable. This phase is temporary. It never holds. Rumors start to circulate. A trade journal notes shipping delays. Delivery estimates on dealer sites quietly slip. Banners appear warning of fulfillment delays or supply chain constraints. The financial press ignores it because it is not a flash crash yet. But the silver bugs spot the trend. Premiums creep up. Specific bullion products vanish from the catalog. The market feels tight but not chaotic. That is phase 2. Phase 3 is the pivot point. A headline breaks, Switzerland enacts temporary export controls. The official statement is bureaucratic and soothing. Routine review, they will say. Procedural matters, nothing to fear. But the market translates review as embargo. It hears supply disruption and flees to safety. Accumulation goes vertical. Dealer stock is wiped out. Premiums shift from uncomfortable to eye-watering. Delivery, lead times push out to months. The conversation shifts from is the price too high to is there any metal left? By phase 4, the shortage is the only topic in the precious metals community. Dealers issue formal statements. Forums explode, rationing begins. 5 ounces per customer, maybe 10 if you have a long-standing relationship. Some retailers simply close the order book. Not for lack of demand, but lack of product. The spot price becomes a theoretical fiction. Paper silver might trade on a screen, but physical silver trades on reality. Premiums of $60, $80, or $100 over spot become standard. If the paper market loses credibility, physical pricing stands alone. $200, $250, $300 an ounce. That is the price of true scarcity. Then the hammer drops. Switzerland extends the review indefinitely. The language is diplomatic, but the impact is brutal. The bullion remains in the Alps. Export licenses become political favors reserved for domestic necessity. Good luck getting one. Refineries elsewhere, North America, Australia, try to ramp up, but you cannot fabricate industrial capacity overnight. Switzerland handles 70% of global refining for a reason. That infrastructure is generational. It does not appear in a quarterly report. By month 3, the paradigm is shifted. Swiss forges are burning, but the metal never crosses the border. It flows into national vaults and local industry. The rest of the globe is cut loose. Dealers are hollowed out, mints are idle, manufacturers are rationing output. In the few gray markets where metal moves, the price reflects absolute scarcity, not speculation. Economists will claim the market will equilibrate. Eventually, yes, but supply chains do not heal in weeks or months. Infrastructure of this magnitude involves a massive capital expenditure cycle. You cannot simply conjure refining capacity from thin air, nor can you accelerate the training of specialized metallurgists or reroute complex global logistics overnight. The history books are riddled with precedents. Look back at the 2010 crisis when Beijing clamped down on rare earth exports. The market reaction was anything but gradual. Valuations went parabolic, realizing gains of 10 times or even 20 times in certain sectors. This deficit persisted for years, not weeks, while nations scrambled to secure independence. Geological surveys and permitting bureaucracies do not bend to panic. We witnessed an identical structural failure during the energy crisis of the 1970s. It was a classic single point of failure scenario involving a concentrated supplier abruptly tightening the tap. Crude prices quadrupled, consumers waited, and rationing lines and economies faced stagnation. Even after the embargo lifted, the psychological baseline of the market had fundamentally shifted. That trauma permanently altered consumption patterns. We are staring at the exact same setup, a strategic asset, a centralized refining bottleneck, and an immediate cessation of flow. Even if Zurich reverses this policy in the coming quarter, the reputational damage is irreversible. Institutional trust is not something you can restore with a corporate press release. Bullion banks, sovereign mints, and industrial users will not forget this exposure. They will aggressively diversify their supply chains. While this pivot will eventually erode Swiss hegemony, the interim period will be excruciating. We are currently navigating that volatility. So how should one position their portfolio in light of this intel? First and foremost, timing is the critical variable. If you have been debating an allocation to physical silver, the window for hesitation is closed. You need to execute this week. Retail inventory is currently available, but that liquidity is evaporating rapidly. Waiting for market clarity is a losing strategy that typically leaves you chasing the ask. Secondly, you must internalize that premiums have reset to a new higher baseline. The spreads only appear exorbitant because you are anchoring to a pre-crisis spot price. In a genuine supply squeeze, the premium over spot expands naturally. This is not market rigging. It is the free market rationing scarce goods. Swallowing the premium today may be painful, but it is preferable to facing a total lack of offer tomorrow. Third, prioritize securing the asset over finding the perfect coin. In a dislocated market, the luxury of rate shopping and waiting for dips is a thing of the past. If a reputable counterparty has metal in the vault, secure it. The best trade is the one that actually settles regardless of marginal cost differences. Fourth, maintain agility. If your preferred sovereign bullion is sold out, pivot immediately to alternatives. Generic bars, private rounds, or secondary market coins. An ounce is an ounce. During a shortage, your objective is physical exposure, not aesthetic perfection. Fifth, adjust your expectations regarding logistics. Shipping delays are going to extend significantly. Locking in a price on a back-ordered item is far superior to holding cash for immediate inventory that may never materialize. Sixth, steer clear of paper derivatives, ETFs, and unallocated accounts. This crisis is strictly about physical availability. Paper instruments can and will decouple from reality, particularly when the mechanism for physical redemption breaks down. If you do not hold the title and the metal, you do not own the asset. And finally, for those already stacked, sit on your hands. This is not the environment to trade in and out. Let the scarcity premium work in your favor. When 70% of global refining capacity goes offline, the macro fundamentals scream louder than any bearish commentary. This entire cascade stems from a single, quiet policy shift made in the pre-market hours. Switzerland prioritized national strategic reserves over global contract obligations. The refineries are still operational, but the export valve is shut tight. The just-in-time delivery system that the West relied upon is fractured. You are receiving this intelligence before the broader market has priced it in, before the panic buying hits fever pitch. This arbitrage window is fleeting. Markets rarely broadcast their inflection points. However, this time we have a definitive timestamp. 2 a.m. Swiss time. That is when the fuse was lit.